Good morning. It's Tuesday morning. It's Mission Tuesday, and we're here on just a beautiful day. Hope you're enjoying Indian summer, which continues all this week. And we are in John chapter 5 as we've been going through the Gospels to draw some lessons from Jesus about evangelism, about sharing our faith. And this morning we're going to talk about boundaries. Boundaries are good things, right? There are boundaries on roads, rails on the side of the road, lines that keep us where we ought to be so we don't injure ourselves or someone else. There are property boundaries that protect what we own from others. There are even boundaries to countries and borders that define who we are as a nation. So boundaries are generally a good thing. However, sometimes boundaries are bad. Boundaries that keep us from being where we ought to be, keep us from engaging people that we need in our lives and who need us. The Apostle Paul talked about such a boundary when he talked about sin being like a wall of hostility that separates us from God. So boundaries are not always good things. And in his evangelistic work, especially his ministry, Jesus sometimes just disregarded boundaries because they were bad. They kept him from people who needed the gospel. And our passage this morning is about one of those occasions as he meets a woman from Samaria. And I'll review the scripture with you, just summarize it. The disciples have gone into town to buy food, and Jesus is left alone, and he sees a woman coming to a well at midday looking for some water. And so Jesus goes and engages her in conversation and asks for a drink, to which the woman says, Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. What are you asking me for a drink? And then he changes the conversation from water into living water, and offers her a drink of water and she'll never be thirsty again. Of course, he's talking spiritually. And then she tries to change the conversation into a religious controversy. Jews versus the Samaritans and where we should worship. And Jesus brings her right back to the spiritual conversation about worship being in spirit and in truth. And eventually he reveals himself as the Messiah. And so Jesus is in total control of this conversation. But what is interesting is that he just ignores two barriers. The first barrier is that between Jews and Samaritans. He, a Jew, engaged a Samaritan in conversation. And Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans and vice versa. In fact, Jews, if you look at a map of Israel, Samaria is right in the middle of between Israel and Judea. And Jews, if they were traveling to Judea, would go around Samaria, not through Samaria. Well, here's Jesus ignoring that and going right to have a conversation with a Samaritan. The other barrier he ignores is that she's a woman. And engaging a woman, if you were a man, engaging a woman in conversation was in direct opposition to rabbinical teaching. So Jesus came with a gospel needed by all sinners, including this woman. And he was not going to let those barriers, whether of tradition or of law, to get in the way of that good news. And neither should we. Whether they're barriers that we've set up for ourselves, separating us from other people or from a person with whom we have a difficult relationship, God may determine that you are the one to share the good news with that person. So we need to be careful about boundaries if they keep us from where we ought to be. By the way, the disciples return and they marvel. They go to get food and they come back and it's like, what is he doing? He's talking with a Samaritan woman and he's sharing the gospel. However, they trusted him and they knew that his motivation was pure, and it was a great example to them about not allowing barriers to separate us from those who need to hear the gospel. So whether that barrier is a matter of income or gender or something in the past, they need to be ignored so that we can share the gospel. So use this as a good example. And we celebrate the good boundaries. Let's ignore the bad ones. God bless your Tuesday.